I used to be best friends with the youngest daughter of Joseph D'Angelo, a man that you may know better by the name the Golden State Killer. It actually still feels surreal to say that out loud. Back when I was growing up, he was just a name that I barely knew, some estranged father my friend rarely talked about. I had no idea who he really was or what he had done, and I don't think that I was alone in that situation. Looking back, the most unsettling part is realizing how close I was, not just to him through his daughters, but to unknowingly crossing paths with one of the most horrific predators this country has ever seen. I didn't grow up in some dangerous area. My life was pretty normal. Suburban California, with its neighborhoods, shopping centers, and a few horse barns scattered around town. Horses were my thing growing up. That's actually how I first met both of his daughters, at different stages of my life and through completely separate circles. I met the youngest daughter in junior high, and we quickly became best friends. We were inseparable for a time, and like most close friendships at that age, you start to learn bits and pieces about each other's families. She was rather open about the fact that her father wasn't really part of her life. She made it clear that the rest of the family kept their distance from him. Only she had any real contact. I never pried, but it always struck me as a little odd. There was this unspoken tension around him that neither of us really ever addressed. At one point early on in the friendship, my mother and I dropped her off at his house. I never went inside. We just pulled up and watched her walk up to the door. That house happened to be in the same neighborhood as my cousin, which at the time didn't mean a thing. But now, it's eerie how close it all was. As high school came and went, we drifted apart like people often do, but we reconnected in early adulthood, even crossing paths socially again. I actually introduced her to my roommate at one point. That situation ultimately blew up, and it was actually the linchpin that caused that friendship to come to an end permanently. Then, years later, I met D'Angelo's middle daughter completely separately through horseback riding. She was close with my trainer, and we became friendly through riding together. We're still friends with each other on Facebook, but we've never once discussed her father. I've always assumed it's something she simply doesn't want to relive, and frankly, I don't blame her. The part that sticks with me the most, though, and the reason that I even want to tell this story, is something that happened long before anyone knew who Joseph D'Angelo really was. It's something I didn't fully process until years later, when all the details about him started to come to light. About 15 years ago now, I was on my way to meet my trainer for a riding session. I was already dressed for it. Breeches, boots, the whole deal. And I decided to stop for gas on the way to the barn. I pulled into this unusually large gas station that always stood out to me because of how strangely spread out it was. Big open lot, pumps spaced a little too far from the store attached. Never many cars around, and this evening was no different. Besides a few employees inside, it was basically empty. Across the lot, parked several pumps away, was a man. Older, tall. At first glance, nothing about him seemed particularly threatening. He was far enough away that I figured we wouldn't even cross paths. But as my tank was filling up, he made his way all the way over to my side of the lot. He struck up a conversation with me, starting with horses. He asked if I rode, where I trained, and threw out a few equestrian terms. Enough to make it seem like he had some familiarity with the sport, but not enough to sound like someone genuinely involved. It was surface-level knowledge, buzzwords that anyone could pick up from just listening in on a few horse barn conversations. At first, I answered what he asked politely, but as his questions got a little more personal, where I trained, where I was headed, that's when I started to feel my unease begin to creep. Something about the way he kept steering the conversation just made me increasingly uncomfortable. Then he said something that completely changed my perception of the entire encounter. He casually mentioned that his daughters used to ride around here. That part caught my attention. In a community as small as the local horse world, it wasn't exactly far-fetched to think I might know them. I asked who his daughters were, and that's when he said their names. My old friend and her sister. Suddenly, everything started to click into place. I knew that this man, even without an introduction, was Joseph DeAngelo. Realizing who I was talking to made me drop my guard slightly. I figured maybe this whole odd encounter was just a socially awkward father trying to make a conversation about some shared connection. That's when I let him know that I knew who his daughters were, that I was even best friends with one of them during our childhood. His tone even shifted after that. He stopped asking so many personal questions and became far less pushy. We exchanged a few final words, and then I excused myself and returned to my car. I still remember the feeling that I had when I was driving away. That whole interaction had felt strange, but I tucked it away in my memory, figuring it was just one of those weird encounters that might happen from time to time. And that's where that thought stayed, in the back of my mind, up until 2018. I was out of state visiting my stepmom in Kentucky. We were having dinner at a sports bar when suddenly every TV in the place lit up with breaking news. A face, a name, all over every screen. Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, had been captured. I froze. It was like the air got sucked out of the room. My stepmom had to have asked me what was wrong 10 times, but I couldn't even form a sentence at first. I just kept staring, trying to process what I was seeing. My brain just couldn't reconcile the man I had spoken to that night with the monster that I was now seeing on TV. I pulled out my phone and started frantically checking news articles, confirming addresses, neighborhood details, street names, all the pieces I already knew but couldn't fully believe until I saw them written out. One of the most terrifying serial predators in California's history, and I had unknowingly stood face to face with him, having a conversation like it was just any other random day. That gas station encounter took on a whole new meaning after that. What if I hadn't known his daughters? What if I hadn't brought up the connection? Was he just being curious? Or was he feeling me out for something more sinister? That's the part that gets to me the most, because I'll never truly know how close I might have come to becoming a blip on his radar that night. Sometimes I still catch myself spiraling through those thoughts, the what ifs. How many people did he approach like that over the years, using his calm, casual, disarming style before revealing who he really was? I think about that chance encounter more often than I care to admit, and every time, I come back to the same realization. If just one thing had played out differently that night, I might not be here telling the story at all. There are some days where I just can't stop thinking about when I almost disappeared. It had to be about 30 years ago now, when I was in 7th grade. I had a bad problem with bullies. The kind of bullying that follows you onto the school bus, into the cafeteria. It pokes at you every day until eventually you just break. And I think that I did. I couldn't handle the daily ridicule anymore, so I stopped taking the bus entirely. Instead, I started walking, 3 miles each way every single day. It wasn't ideal, but it was my escape. A long sidewalk along a busy road, most of it straight, predictable. It felt far safer than the bus ever did. Back then, no one really raised an eyebrow at a kid walking alone for miles. My dad, who I lived with full time, didn't see any problem with it. My mom, who I stayed with on weekends, didn't even know about it. I never told her. I didn't want to give her another thing to worry about. For over half the school year, this was my routine. And while I wasn't exactly a fit or active kid, I got used to it. The walk became part of my life. Then came the day that I don't think I'll ever forget. It was a regular afternoon, halfway home, when I saw a car pull off to the side of the road up ahead of me, about 100 feet when I think back on it. I squinted. The car looked familiar. The shape, the color, it was my dad's car. Relief flooded over me. I figured that he must be here to pick me up. Finally, a break from walking. I smiled and jogged towards the car. As I got closer, a few small details started to stick out to me. My dad's car had a tan interior, but I could see this one was red inside. And his hair, wasn't it usually lighter than that? But my brain dismissed it. I was tired, hot, and ready to get off my feet. I swung open the passenger door, tossed my backpack onto the floorboard, swung my legs inside, and shut the door behind me. Without a word, we started moving. That's when I actually got my first look at this guy. It wasn't my dad. The man behind the wheel was much older, easily 20 years older than my father. His hair was dyed black, sitting stiff and unnatural. He wore a short-sleeved button-down shirt that looked like something my dad might have owned. His hands were planted rigidly on the wheel, and he smiled, this big, toothy smile that, under any other circumstance, might have felt grandfatherly. But in that moment, it sent a chill right through me. That's when I heard the soft click of the door locks engaging. My eyes froze on the lock for a few seconds before I slowly turned forward, now paralyzed with fear. He spoke in a calm and friendly tone. "Hello. I saw you walking and thought I'd give you a lift." I didn't respond. My mind raced, doing my best to stay calm, to not act scared. Just stay calm. We were still on the main road, about a mile from my neighborhood, half a mile from the turn that would take us there. He kept going. "You on your way home?" My voice barely worked, but I managed to nod and say yes. He smiled wider. "Where's your house? I'll take you there." I tried to sound normal as I told him to take the next right. Inside, my stomach was turning, but I forced my breathing to stay steady. As we approached the intersection, I made sure to point it out again. But instead of merging into the turn lane, he stayed in the lane that he was in. My heart pounded. I tightened my grip on my backpack straps, so hard that my fingers even went numb. Then, at that last possible moment, he swerved into the turn lane and made the right turn. I felt myself exhale slightly, but I knew that I wasn't safe yet. His tone shifted again. "Are you sure? We could go for a little ride instead, just for fun." The way he said it, it wasn't a suggestion. I forced my voice steady. "No, I need to get home. My dad's expecting me right now." I hoped it sounded more convincing than it felt. He gave a sigh, almost like he was disappointed. "Okay, maybe next time? We can meet at the same place tomorrow." I nodded quickly. "Tomorrow, yeah, sure. Anything to get through this." The next turn, the one that was into my neighborhood, was coming up fast. I pointed it out, again emphasizing that this was where I lived. Another stretch of silence hung in the air before he finally made the turn. A flicker of hope sparked. Maybe I was going to get out of this. But a new fear rose in my chest. This man can't know where I live. Before I could even figure out what to say, he spoke again. "You know, maybe it's better if I don't drop you right at your house. Don't want your dad to see me and get mad for giving you a ride. Could ruin our plans for tomorrow." Relieved, I seized on that suggestion. "Here's good then," I said, pointing to a spot in front of a nearby apartment complex, nowhere near my actual house. He pulled over, unlocked the doors, and I scrambled out as fast as I could. As I shut the door, he called out one last time. "See you tomorrow. Same time?" I forced myself to look back briefly. He was still smiling that same smile. I nodded. "Tomorrow." I closed the door and walked briskly away. I didn't run. I didn't act scared, although I was terrified. I just kept walking. I could hear his car idling behind me. My skin crawled knowing his eyes were still on me. It wasn't until I turned down a side path and out of his view that I heard the engine rev as he finally pulled away. When I glanced back, he was struggling to make a tight turn. For just a brief moment, our eyes met again. He gave a little wave before disappearing down the road. The moment he was out of sight, I ran. As fast as I could, backpack bouncing behind me, lungs burning. I sprinted around buildings, cut through backyards, hid between structures just in case he circled back. I must have stayed hidden for 10 to 15 minutes, but it felt like forever. Finally, convinced that he was gone, I darted home, using every shortcut I knew. I threw open that front door, locked it behind me, and collapsed on the floor. I was home, and I couldn't believe it. Later that night, I told both of my parents. My mother immediately insisted my dad start picking me up from school every day. He wasn't exactly thrilled about it. In fact, he thought I was lying to avoid walking anymore. In his defense, my panicked explanation wasn't very convincing. Yeah, Dad, it was just like your car, but with a red interior. And yeah, he looked like you, but older and with darker hair. It all just happened so fast. But I didn't care that he didn't fully believe me. I was safe, and I never saw that man again. I grew up in the South. Tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice, but along with that, it gets pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good will come out of the night. There wasn't exactly a local go-to spot to hang out, and places that were close to this were boring because you did them so many other times. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand that feeling completely. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a teen was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill my gas tank up, grab something to drink on, a cigarillo to puff, and I would just take off driving around until the sun came up. It was a way for me to just clear my mind and relax. Those country back roads were always fun to drive down at 2 a.m., and I also found them to be the right amount of spooky. Well, one night, I got far more than I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I know for a fact that it was in the summertime because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortable, chill night. So if I was to guess, I would say that it was around July, maybe August. I was cruising around like I always did, and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring, and I was in my zone. I decided to head down to a park just out of sheer boredom. This particular park is at the very end of a long stretch of desolate country road, but it is a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy like that. It's a normal paved road, but there's nothing really on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down to get to the park, and after about 10 minutes into the drive, the houses start to get spread out further and further until it becomes no houses and just road leading into the park. I think a lot of the reason I liked this drive at night is because of how creepy it was, and I looked at it as some sort of adventure or whatever a teen sees it as. The park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods. So obviously at around 3 a.m., it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow, normal loop of a drive around the park. The night before, it stormed pretty badly. So badly that I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado touchdown. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty damn rough. Because of this, I came up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park. I figured it was only there because of the storm itself. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I know for a fact that there was no way I could have gotten over it in my car. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and due to that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way that I just drove to get into the park. I knew that was super dangerous, and there was no way that having just under a year of licensed driving under my belt, I was going to be able to do it. At this spot on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense to just back up in the grass beside me a little bit, do a 3-point turn, and drive back the way I came. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out the wrong way since it was so late. So I started to back up off the road so I could get my car turned around. All was good until I went to pull back up onto the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was, as well as the amount of mud. My car went absolutely nowhere. Back tires completely stuck and spinning in place as I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I started to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal situation to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and see that I had service. A super huge feeling of relief. I called my parents and told them what happened and where I was. They were pretty pissed, but said they'll pay for the tow truck to come out and get me. My parents both drove small 4-door sedans and they would have been zero help in this situation. I was about 45 minutes away from my house and the rest of most human civilization. So I realized I would be stuck out there for at least an hour before someone was able to come get me. Freaky feeling, but I tried getting out of my head and just continued to listen to music and be on my phone in the car while I waited. Not really much more I could do anyway. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because of everything else going on, but in front of where my car came to rest, there was a field that was full of the most deer that I think I've ever seen at once. Legitimately 40 or so deer in this field just walking around eating the grass. Now the field itself wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock in that direction, I would have easily been able to hit one of them. So if I was to guess, they were like 30 yards out. This didn't really help with the creepy level going on. Looking out in front of your car and seeing 80 plus eye reflections staring back at you is a bit of an alarming feeling overall. But I was relieved it was just a field of deer. I watched them for a little bit, although I quickly got over it and started to just browse through my social media apps while waiting. They seemed to have been over it quicker than I was, because they all went back to eating and walking around once they figured out that I wasn't going to attack them or anything. After browsing on my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that a tow truck guy is on the way out. He's about an hour and a half from my location. Still to this day, I remember hearing that and having the thought, you have got to be fucking kidding me. I understood that I was the only one to blame for the situation I was in, so I couldn't really be mad at anyone else. But that was very obviously not what I wanted to hear. I decided that the smartest thing for me to do was just make sure my doors were all locked, lay back in my seat, and take a nap to pass time as quickly as I could. So that's what I did. Now, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced that feeling before because I don't know how common it is. But there was this sixth sense alarm going off in my head telling me that I need to wake up. Waking up to that feeling in the situation I was in and the surrounding I was in is probably the worst case scenario. I sit up and immediately check around myself, but I see nothing. I looked through my car quickly for any sort of weapon and found a pocket knife. Okay, better than nothing. I was a bit scared at this point, and even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing, that feeling is terrifying. I was shocked to see that the field of deer in front of me was still full of deer. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always just assumed they don't hang out in the same place for long. Not sure why I thought that, but I was surprised to see them nonetheless. I called my parents back to see if they had heard any kind of update from the tow truck dude. I decided to not mention the feeling I was having because I didn't want to worry them more, and I also knew that it was literally nothing more than a feeling. One that I had nothing to back up why I was feeling that way, other than just being spooked out in general. No update from the tow truck guy, so we all assumed everything was still the same on his end. The call lasted just a few minutes because I felt like such a dick. They both had to wake up for work in a few hours. Now they had to spend a random $100 plus on this tow. And on top of that, they were already worried about me. I could tell they were annoyed at the situation, but like parents, they were concerned. I told them I'll make sure to tell them when the guy arrives, and I'm sorry. We hung up, and I looked up for my phone. I immediately went from 0 to 100 in panic mode. The deer in front of me were all completely perked up and staring in the same direction to the right of them. Let me remind you that there are around 40 deer in this field, and every single one of them were stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still, and looking at the same something. I turned on my high beams and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen at all. Nothing. I tapped my horn real quick. They didn't even budge or look my way. They were all still completely glued to whatever was by them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far over the field. I know they were looking into the woods, but where I was at, I was only able to see them. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I grabbed that stupid pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say that it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison started to run the opposite way. They were running at full speed, and within 20 seconds, that field was clear. I was petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car is what would be the safest thing to do, but it's the worst feeling in the world when you just feel like a sitting duck. My head was on a swivel. I was freaking out in every way possible. I assumed that it was a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it might have been the devil himself. I didn't know what to do. I knew the tow truck was close by, but I had no idea where. I began to shake because of nerves and just looked around to make sure nothing was by me, all while still focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something, anything, to jump out of the darkness. 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it's a tow truck. The lights on his truck felt like it was Jesus coming down from heaven to rescue me. He gets up to me, and I jump out of my car and immediately ask him if he has a gun on him. I told him very quickly what had just happened, and that something is definitely out here nearby. He let me know that he had a shotgun in the truck and assured me that it was most likely a bear or a bobcat. He gave me the whole, "They're more scared of you than you are of them" bullshit. The tree in the road was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way with his truck, and then he attached my car to his and pulled me out of the spot that I was stuck in. He was pretty nonchalant about what I just experienced, but I was pretty badly shaken up from it. The whole time he was doing his thing, I still had my eyes glued out in that field waiting for something. The tow truck guy was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me to follow his truck out of there and onto the main road again. I got back in my car and was more ready than anything to get the hell out of this park. We started to drive away from the spot I was in, and I still had my head on a swivel, still completely shaken up. As we were driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, but I could still see the spot that I was stuck in partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon. I watched in my rearview mirror as a man came out of the tree line behind where my car was, and then walk into the middle of the road to watch us drive away. My heart stopped beating for just a second. Legitimately, I lost my breath, and my eyes started to get full of tears because of how absolutely scared I was in this moment. I couldn't see any sort of details like what he looked like or even necessarily what he was wearing. To be honest, I don't really care. The feeling that I felt driving away from that spot, knowing he was right there the whole time watching me as I was freaking out looking around, watching me as I was completely alone for a terribly long time, maybe even coming right up to the window and watching me as I slept. That's a feeling that I can't necessarily put into words. All these years later, and it still messes with me quite a bit. The entire time we were driving off, as long as I could see him, that man didn't move once he came to rest in the road. He just watched us. A million things went through my mind. I was scared there may have been multiple people up the road waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn like crazy to get the tow truck guy to stop or not. I decided that all I wanted to do was get out of there, more than anything in the world. The second that we finally got out of the park and I was able to be on a 2-lane road again, I flew past the tow truck driver and did nothing below 70 the entire way home. I flew through stop signs, even blew through a few stoplights. I absolutely did not care. The only thing on my mind was making it home. I got home, ran inside, and very quickly acknowledged my parents, saying sorry and thank you before heading to my room. I didn't get a single second of sleep the rest of the night. I was searching for any sort of records of things happening in that area. Police reports, strange encounters, anything similar to the story that I just experienced. I came to the conclusion that that man was some sort of squatter or a homeless person. I read many things online how it's common for homeless in rural areas to build shelters out in the woods, which does make sense to me entirely on why they would do that. But obviously, the unknown is the scariest part of it all. What if he wasn't homeless? What if he had plans to hurt me? What if? There's so many possibilities of what could have happened, but the outcome that did happen is what I'm most grateful for. I didn't tell my parents the story until many years after it happened, and I was already an adult and moved out. It freaked them the fuck out too when I told them. I never went back to that park, ever. Even though I no longer live by there, I still have no desire at all to ever go back there. I don't think that I could bring myself to do it even in broad daylight with a ton of people around. I also made the decision to stop doing those late night cruises. I did a couple more after this experience, but even with people, that uncomfortable feeling and being on edge just never went away. I'm now in my late 20s, and while I still enjoy a relaxing drive on occasion, but once the clock strikes midnight, you won't catch me on the road.